KevinMD, I know you know about the website. Unless you're living under the rock, you probably know that it is one of the most influential sites out there for physicians where you can submit an article and get your message spread to millions of people. But what you may not know is the man behind KevinMD. Why did this man start a website, a busy internist, busy with his own practice? So I had a rare opportunity to interview this gentleman who has been at the forefront in addressing issues that not a lot of people were talking about back then. Issues about physician well-being, about mental health, about dealing with doctor burnout. Why did he start the website? How does he edit his articles? What's the staff behind it? What are his future plans? Did he have a business plan? We answer those questions and more. I'll be talking with Dr. Kevin Poe on this episode of Bootstrap MD. Hey guys, this is Dr. Mike Wu-Ming. Welcome to another edition of Bootstrap MD. This is the podcast for physician entrepreneurs and business owners. Really, my next guest really needs no introduction. You all know his name. And today we're going to find out more about the man who is behind one of the most famous websites out there for physicians. He is a practicing board-certified internal medicine physician, a national media commentator, co-author of the book, Establishing, Managing, and Protecting Your Online Reputation. I have a little part in that book. His website receives over 3 million monthly page views with over 250,000 followers in Twitter and Facebook, cited in major media, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CNN named his site one of its 5 recommended healthcare Twitter feeds. And in 2019, I was proud to be part of a committee that named him from Medscape one of the top 20 physician social media influencers. Please welcome Dr. Kevin Poe. Kevin, so nice to have you on the program today.
Mike, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I had to put my own spin on the bio because it's all about myself. Kevin, let's talk about it. KevinMD has been around since, I've been on the internet and we're kind of dating ourselves. You started KevinMD in 2004, is that right?
That's right. 17 years ago. I was just thinking about that the other day.
One question, why?
Yeah. So, well, I like to say that I had a business plan back in 2004 and follow through on a business plan to where it is now, but I really can't say that because back then, as you probably know, there were like fewer than 50 doctors who had blogs, and blogs were just coming up at that time, and people didn't know what the heck blogs were. So I remember writing an article, I think it was after one of the drug recalls, and the next day, a patient in the exam room, they said to me, Dr. Poe, I read your blog post this morning, and I was really comforted by what you had to say. And I think that was kind of like my light bulb moment where we can use social media and use the internet to really talk to people, not one-on-one to the examiner, but one-to-many. And I think that has been a little bit prescient because now, especially with COVID and people are going online to research their health information, we all really need to be online. So KevinMD has certainly evolved over the last 17 years, especially with the evolution of the various social media tools and the evolution of how patients are empowering themselves to look for things online. And I think it's been tremendously gratifying to be part of that evolution, to help guide patients to relevant health information, to become a platform where physicians can really share their stories, because that's something that we need more of. We need more of a voice. And it's been very gratifying and rewarding to play a small role in that.
Well, I think you're underestimating your influence. It's definitely not played a small role in my life. It is must-see reading and now listening with your podcast, but we'll talk more about that. I'd like to delve into what you've seen in KevinMD. I think for me, one of the first things that I noticed was talking about subjects that were, quote, considered taboo. Mm-hmm. And what I'm talking for is physician burnout. As you know, back then, it was almost heresy to talk about these things. when did you first start noticing that, a lot of your articles were talking about burnout, and now, we're now in a realm where side gigs and businesses on the side is almost commonplace. But when did you first start to see those type of articles?
I would say within the last 10 years or so, and especially intensifying during the pandemic. The numbers from Medscape, right? 50% of clinicians report symptoms of burnout, and that number is only going to go up when they repeat these surveys, especially during the pandemic. One of the tenets I had on my site was really that a lot of the conversations surrounding healthcare, they were made by people who don't actually practice medicine, or if they were physicians, they don't necessarily see patients every day. And I found that they would control the narrative of the conversation. And a lot of the factors in our lives as practicing clinicians, they will be affected by these decision makers who don't necessarily see patients. So that's why I think it's tremendously important really for us to have a voice that's edited by a clinician who sees patients and really becomes a proverbial safe space for physicians to really share their stories. And of course, burnout has been in the forefront within the last few years, but I would say 5 to 10 years that clinicians are burning out, and I think it's really a lack of autonomy. I think that there's a lot of policy experts that's telling us what to do, how many patients to see, how many RVUs we need to make. We have to use these electronic medical records. We have to do 30 click strokes to prescribe a medication, and I think that's leading to a lot of it. And we didn't really have a place where we can share these stories. So I think that over the last 10 years or so, and especially intensifying over the last few years, I think it's all the more important to have a physician-run platform where we can share these stories and not only have policymakers listen to what we have to say, but patients as well, because a lot of patients don't really know what goes on behind the closed doors. They don't know about the struggles that clinicians face in caring for them. And if more clinicians are burning out and struggling to take care of patients, we're already seeing the great resignation in healthcare, right? We're seeing more and more clinicians cutting back on clinical hours and leaving clinical medicine altogether. And what good are we if we can't, it's not going to help patients if there aren't going to be any clinicians to take care of them. So I think those are the reasons that really contributed to the evolution of sharing these specific stories of burnout.
Remember when you could practice medicine on your own terms? What if you could take control of your physician career, make more money while working smarter, not harder? Pick up your copy of The Positioned Physician. Earn more, work smart, and love medicine again. Now updated for 2021, The Positioned Physician details one doctor's journey from burnt-out employee to successful entrepreneur. Whether you are in residency, in mid-career, or close to retirement, after reading The Positioned Physician, you'll gain the knowledge that can strategically impact your doctor life. The Positioned Physician, now available on Amazon Kindle and paperback.
As someone who has really been, one of the pioneers in healthcare and social media, really in the last couple of years, social media has been under attack, or has not been as fruitful as we think. Let's face it, as a physician, we feel like we have a war on science, a lot of disinformation. We all know about Facebook, and Twitter. And sometimes as physicians, I remember I was just recently on a conversation, just, peripherally talking about vaccine mandates, and like, boom, I got hit on it. Where is the line, and what is our role as a physician as it pertains to social media in 2021?
So I've been giving keynotes and talking about social media for over 10 years now. And I have to admit that I guess similar to Mark Zuckerberg, I think my outlook on social media was a little bit more idealistic in the first few years. And I thought that social media was a place where physicians can share information, guide patients to better sources of health information, and really had a more positive, almost naive outlook of how social media can be. Of course, over the last few years, the whole societal landscape has been politicized, and I think social media has played a great role in that. I think I'm a little bit of a realist now, whereas I talked to doctors earlier that they should really go on social media for the positive things. But now I think it's more of a responsibility for physicians to get on social media because, as I mentioned before, patients are going online. And I think looking for health information online is the third most popular activity that people do on the internet. And now, especially with COVID and the COVID vaccines and masks, I think that there's a lot of false information that is out there. So rather than physicians proactively going on and share and guiding patients to these reputable sources of health information. I think it's more, I'm going to frame it more as a moral responsibility. I think that if physicians aren't online and guiding patients and providing reputable health information, patients are going to go elsewhere to look for this. And there's a lot of pseudo practitioners, and there's a lot of people who are motivated by politics and an ideology that may spread false information. And if physicians aren't online, then patients are going to be influenced by these false narratives. And so now, whereas earlier on, I think I always said physicians go online for kind of a more sunnier outlook. I think now it's kind of more of a responsibility that more of us have to do it, because if we don't, other people are going to feed our patients with information that can hurt them.
I'm going to be honest here. I'm not the biggest fan on posting personal stuff on social media. I mean, I've looked on your Instagram and your Facebook. You don't really post a lot, maybe some pictures of the family, kind of same thing too. But we all know we have physicians who their entire life is on TikTok and Instagram. And where do we kind of draw the line?
Yep.
Because I personally have never found one person say, you know what, I changed my political view because I read that post on Facebook. It's a fine line, isn't it, about what we can share about ourselves on social media?
Yeah, the traditional advice is really to separate, especially on Facebook, your personal and professional lives, right? So you have a Facebook page that's more professional, it could be associated with their practice, and that's not the place you necessarily want to share pictures with your family. And then you have a more private, personal profile page where you could share family events, right? So that's the traditional advice. I think one of the things that I always advise clinicians to do is to sometimes share these stories to kind of humanize the medical profession. A lot of doctors are put on pedestals, and I think that there's a lack of connection. So one of the arguments for social media that I traditionally advise is that sometimes you could just share a little bit about yourself that maybe outside of what they do in the exam room, and that can help better connect with patients. But in terms of influencing patients and changing political views, I think, of course, that's very, very difficult. When I talk about the online audience in general, it's normally divided into thirds, where 1/3 are people who agree with everything that you say. 1/3 are people who don't agree with anything that you say, no matter what you do. And then there's a third that's kind of in the middle. And whenever you're trying to go online and persuade people, whether it's about vaccines and whatnot, it's really that middle third that you're trying to influence. So you're not trying to go online to influence everybody that you meet. That's really not the goal. But if you could change the mind of maybe 1 or 2 people out of 10, I think that's a job well done, and the best that we can hope for in today's climate.
And really, the statistics have brought that out in terms of yes, as physicians, we still have influence. When they've had studies suggested that if they decide to get the vaccine, majority of them say the best source is their primary care physician. But it's really interesting too. I want to know your opinion about how these algorithms, it's now come out, in Congress, about how they've changed the algorithms to just focus on things that carry an emotion, anger issue, using hate speech on there. What's your opinion of all that? And, does it need to be regulated?
Yeah, I think overall it's been harmful to society, in terms of playing on emotions, because what generates an emotional response is typically conflict, right? It's typically conflict and inflammation. If you post something that everyone agrees with, chances are that's not going to spread as much as something that's highly charged and highly politicized. And whether inadvertent or not, these type of algorithms are just going to fan the flames and really emphasize the tribal nature of our society. So overall, I think it's a net negative effect. Now, what is our role as physicians in this? Are we going to throw our hats into this tribe? And I think it goes back to what I said before, is that our job isn't necessarily to convince people to change tribes, but as purveyors of science, I think we do have a responsibility to get online and, hey, this is what we believe to be reputable sources. And there are going to be some out there who still respect science and respect medicine and still listen to us. Maybe fewer than there were before, given the polarized nature of society. But like I said, our goal isn't to change everyone's minds. If we could change 1 or 2 out of 10, I think that's really the best that we can hope for, and certainly better than not participating at all.
I'd like to shift gears just a bit. And we're talking about, it's been 17 years since KevinMD has been launched. Can you imagine that you're still doing this? Or was this part of that 20, 30-year plan, this little blog that maybe you're doing on the side and is now kind of grown? And then also focus on, like, what have you noticed? What things have changed, since, looking back from 2004 to 2021?
I think what we mentioned before about how highly charged the audience is, I think that, when it first started out, I didn't think that pretty much every issue is politicized now, and it wasn't back then. The evolution of different media, of social media, so it's not just Facebook, but we have, of course, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, various video forms, Facebook Live. So many different ways to express ourselves. I think that's been exciting. I always advise doctors, if they want to go online, they don't necessarily have one medium that they can stick with. They can choose a medium that suits their strength, right? If they're great writers, they can start a blog. If they're great on camera, they can do videos or podcasts. There's so many different avenues that suits an individual clinician's strength. So I think that has been really one of the biggest changes, and it's been exciting to be a part of that.
Do you feel that you've had to work on, I can't imagine how many articles you get in a day. Does it seem like you've had to filter a lot more than before?
Yeah, there's definitely been more articles, especially whenever you have big health events. I normally publish about 20 to 30% of the articles that I receive. I'm partial to stories. I'm partial to personal experiences. I think that, like I said, I'm just very, very gratified that physicians trust my platform and see it as a place where they can really share their voices and have their voices be heard. I've heard a lot of stories where a physician would write an article on KevinMD and someone from mainstream media would pick up on it, and then it would lead to a bigger platform to them, whether it's a newspaper gig or appearing on television. So I'm just happy that these physicians have used my sites to gain more visibility, because really it's all about getting our voices to be heard. And like I said, if I play a small role in that's really what keeps me going over the last 17 years and really trying to move the needle. And as a primary care doctor, yes, I can move the needle individually in an exam room, but if I can use my expertise, my motivation, my drive in social media and help get more of our voices heard, I think that's another way where I can make a difference as well.
As you know, I love talking about physician entrepreneurship, and especially when I interview physician entrepreneurs, I always like to get kind of an inside scoop of what's going on. So how much time does KevinMD take? Do you have a big staff? Are you editing all the articles yourself? Can you give us some insight behind KevinMD?
So I'm half-time, so I still practice primary care and telemedicine. So I see patients about half a week. And then the other half is doing the various KevinMD activities. So I publish 4 times a day. And I choose the articles that get published. I do have an editorial assistant that helps me copy edit about half the articles. I have a technical team that keeps the site up, and that is actually one of the more stressful parts of running a large website, is keeping it up and all the technical issues that come with that. But I have a great technical team that I can outsource that to. But primarily, it's me and my editorial assistant, and that's it. I keep my staff small. I can make decisions on my own, and as you mentioned, I started a podcast last year to kind of expand the reach and influence of KevinMD and allowing people to share their stories in their own words. So it's been fairly nimble. I'm able to adjust KevinMD to keep up with the trends, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I had such a large staff.
As a doctor, I wasn't used to asking for help, especially when it came to subjects outside of medicine. But then I found physiciancoaches.com. In an instant, I found hundreds of experts to help me in all aspects of life. On areas I was afraid to ask. Dealing with burnout, starting a side gig, money management, even help with my marriage. And the best part? Nearly all experts are physicians themselves. After reading their profile and a quick chat, I knew I found the right mentor for me. At physiciancoaches.com, help from professional colleagues is just a click away.
Physician entrepreneurs always have difficulty balancing their clinical life with their business life. When did you decide to make that transition from full-time to half-time?
Yeah, so probably a couple of years ago, I decided to make that transition. Of course, economics plays a role into it in terms of the revenue that KevinMD generates versus the salary I make on my primary care job. But I think that everyone has to make a decision that's right for them and their family. And also, whatever fills your professional cup. I think that if there was one part of my professional life that I felt was detracting or felt I didn't want to do, whether it's maybe I'm seeing too many patients in a clinic or even doing screening or posting too many articles on KevinMD, if I ever felt that one part of my professional life overwhelmed the other and just kind of took away from my overall enjoyment of life, I would probably adjust it and say, hey, that's not the right balance. Right now, I do have the right balance. I feel energized whenever I go into the clinic to see patients, and subsequently, I'm still moving along and posting articles on KevinMD and publishing a daily podcast. And hopefully once the pandemic improves, I'll go back out speaking again. And I manage a physician speaker bureau. And I think that one of the themes that I have on my site is that doctors are more than their degrees. The traditional path of medicine isn't necessarily so traditional anymore. We're not just training and going to medical school and residency for 7 to 10 years and then staying in a hospital or seeing patients. And as your audience knows, that we could be so much more than that. And we can branch off in so many different ways. And using my medical degree to branch off into media, podcasts, speaking, managing a speakers bureau, and of course, running a internet platform, that's all been so gratifying to me. It's never been taught in medical school, and it really feeds my entrepreneurial spirit and really keeps me going clinically.
Did you ever have thought in your mind, is a bit, because you have a lot of stuff going on. You got the physician speaking, where you help coach, you coach, you've got the podcast. Do you say, this is too much, I'm just going to retire?
Yeah.
Has that come up, and when is that time?
Well, it hasn't. I think that if you enjoy doing things, and sounds, obviously the cliche goes, if you enjoy doing something, you're never going to work a day in your life, right? So I think I'm at that point where, in terms of hours, yes, it's a lot of work if you put it in terms of hours, but if you put it in terms of fulfillment, it's really not that much work. It's something I certainly enjoy doing. I enjoy reading the feedback, and I enjoy exploring podcasts and just listening to physician stories and hear what they're doing in their own world. And I've just learned so much. And like I said, if I felt that it was too much and I didn't enjoy it, then you're right, I probably would stop, but that time hasn't come yet.
So we do occasionally on our podcast a segment. It's kind of fun, but it could be kind of scary. We call it 5 Unexpected Questions with our podcast guest. Kevin, are you willing to take on the challenge?
Sure, bring it on.
All right, I love that. Okay, here are the 5 unexpected questions. Number 1, what was the last show you binge watched?
Squid Game, right? Like everyone else. But then I lost. Then it recommended another Japanese show, Alice in Borderland. So now my Netflix feed is full of these death game series. So I am that's the last show I've been, like millions of others.
Yes, I have to admit, my wife said, "Why are you watching this? Why are you watching this program?" And I go, "I'm not the only one. It's number 1 on Netflix." I don't know what that says about society, but that's for another talk.
Yeah.
Number 2, if I find myself in New Hampshire, what would be the best restaurant to recommend? What type of food?
If you find yourself in New Hampshire, what's the best restaurant to recommend? The longer I think, all my New Hampshire rights are going to say that, you can't even name a restaurant in New Hampshire. Honestly, I have to go down to Boston, dude.
Oh,
to go to a place. I know that's tough. I'm partial to lobster, so I'm actually going to say somewhere in Maine. There's a place called Mabel's in Kennebunkport, which is where I love to recommend, because I remember for the first time that I had such a large lobster, it was like like 3 pounds, right? It was like nothing. And you have those memorable meals that kind of like stick in the back of your mind, and you just remember for the rest of your life. So that would be it. A place called Mabel's in Kennebunkport, where they fed me a 3-pound boiled lobster, and it was one of the most memorable meals that I have. And whenever I'm in that area, I try to visit that.
I think you might have to watch your stats from the New Hampshire in your KevinMD. You might be dropping, but thanks for that answer. You got so much stuff going on. What's a Kevin Poe morning routine? What's an average morning routine for you?
Yeah, so I do wake up pretty early to just get everything done in terms of what I want to post that day, in terms of the podcast that I want to promote. So between 5:30 or so, and then drive the kids to school, and then depending if I have a clinic day, then I'll go straight from driving to school to my clinic. I work 3/4 day, so I finish around 2 or 3, and then I go to sports games with my daughter who's a junior in high school, or I make sure that things like homework is done, and then in the evenings it's really doing more on KevinMD, whether it's preparing a keynote or editing podcasts. And I'm not sure if you do your own editing, but editing podcasts actually takes so much more work than the actual interviews itself. So I do a daily podcast, so that takes up a lot of time as well. And then the day flies by.
I do like editing my podcast, but it's one of those things that I do like. And it's a lot easier for me to remember, this part needs to be edited. Mm-hmm. I do use tools like Descript to help me out. It takes out the ums and ahs, but yeah, it's just one of the things that I kind of enjoy. Number 4, what is a surprising fact that most people wouldn't know about Kevin Poe?
What is a surprising fact? Probably that I know probably as much about NFL football as I do about medicine. That's I always say. It's like I'm a big football junkie, and I follow the sport pretty closely. Not just follow, but I know the ins and outs. I study professional football almost as much as I do about medicine. So whenever I watch a game, or I'm really interested in the inner workings, the tactics, the strategy. And then one of the things that I always say to my daughter is, if I knew medicine as much as I know about football, I'd be the best doctor in the world.
I assume you're a Patriot fan?
I am a Patriot fan, yes.
Okay. He went to Michigan, so got to give love. You may be retiring early than Tom Brady is. So
yeah.
And then finally, 3 best books you would recommend to a friend or colleague.
3 best books. So I'm actually reading a book about the Patriots. It's Better to Be Feared, right, by Seth Wickersham. And one of the reasons I like that book is, of course, not only to read about the Patriots, but really what goes behind greatness, what makes something great. And I always like to apply lessons from other industries into medicine, right? Because as you probably know, if you apply things from other industries into medicine, you'll always be ahead of the curve in medicine, because medicine's always 1 to 2 years behind every other industry. So that book is particularly interesting because it goes behind the New England Patriots, their various Super Bowl dynasties, and the interactions between Bob Kraft, the owner, Bill Belichick, and Tom Brady, and really what makes them tick, what makes them great. And I'm always looking for lessons outside of medicine in order to just better myself, just to be continuously improving. So the second book is Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds. Fantastic book. It really changed my outlook on speaking, because he is used to be an Apple evangelist, and now he's a speaking coach. And really, he uses the concepts of Zen. He lives in Japan, so a lot of these Japanese influence into keynote speaking, keeping things simple, and in terms of the visuals, keeping everything simple. And now his influenced my keynote style, so I try to speak with as few slides as possible. One of my goals is to do a whole 60-minute keynote without any visual aids, and just trying to kind of keep things as simple as possible. And that's been a big influence in terms of my speaking career. And then the third one is A Simple Path to Wealth. It's a personal finance book that is recommended by a lot of people in the physician finance community. And I do recommend it because I think that physicians are deficient in general when it comes to personal finance. And if they want to get a start on managing their finances, getting out of debt, because that is one of the ways to be financially free. And I think if you're financially free from medicine, you could cut back, and that's going to help with your burnout, right? So in order to cut back and pursue other interests, you have to be debt free. And I recommend starting at a personal, what did I say that book was? A simple path to wealth. So I think that I would recommend those 3 books.
Kevin, congratulations. You passed the challenge.
Fantastic, Mike.
Other than, and you didn't even correct me and remembering that Tom Brady is not the quarterback of the Patriots, it's Mac Jones. So, but we'll acknowledge Sir Tom.
Fantastic. Well, the next Patriots dynasty hopefully will begin soon.
So much information, so much knowledge that you've given us today. Let's talk about your podcast. Tell it more about that, and why did you start it, and what can they get out from your podcast?
So I have the podcast by KevinMD. It's a daily podcast where you have 15 minutes a day, 7 days a week. And so it's a show where I can share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. And it's really KevinMD authors where they can just tell their stories in their own words. And my job is tremendously easy. Like, you've been on the show, I just sit back, ask questions, and I've learned from so many of the other clinicians that are on there. So it's available on all the podcast platforms. The podcast by KevinMD, 15 minutes a day, 7 days a week, your daily dose of information, insight, and inspiration.
Yeah, it's been really great, really wide variety of guests on all aspects of healthcare, not just physicians, non-physicians as well, giving this and trying to better understand this thing we called healthcare. Kevin, again, it's been a pleasure. Of course, you know the site KevinMD. Also, you have other platforms that we didn't have time to talk about, but if you're a physician speaker, he has the physician speaking. He's a coach as well. I didn't realize that you coach as well. So there's so many different aspects of Kevin outside of just being a New England Patriot fanatic. So thanks again, Kevin, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mike, for having me on.
And thank you for joining us on this episode. Hopefully it inspired you. If you're someone who wants to get their message out there, wants to start a business, you don't need to have everything all ready. As you saw, Kevin didn't have a business plan, but he had a message. He had something. He wanted his voice to get across, and he just built it. And if it's not about just thinking about it or researching about it, if you suffer from analysis paralysis, we all have, but it's what gets you to that next step. And for you, I challenge you, what is going to take you to get to that next step of your business? It doesn't have to happen right away. It can just take small incremental steps. Get a domain name, getting an article written, setting up your blog, and that's where it all starts. It all starts by taking these small steps and keep moving forward. Hey, Dr. Mike here. I hope you're inspired by that interview. And if you aspire to become a coach or consultant yourself, I highly encourage you to check out my free on-demand masterclass, How to Become a Highly Paid In-Demand Physician Consultant or Coach. On the masterclass, I'll not only show you my story of how I've become a physician consultant for over 15 years, I'll also show you real-life case studies of physicians who are actively doing this now, either adding or replacing their current income as a doctor. To register for the masterclass, we'll leave a link in the show notes. I look forward to sharing you this important information today.